Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all our internal committee members and participants. At Metis, we believe that safety and dignity are absolutely non-negotiable, and that true inclusion begins when every identity feels safe at work. So, 2026, we as Metis envisage inclusivity to be a norm in workplaces where all the employees would be more open about their identities and sexualities. So, today, as workplaces evolve, we are witnessing a very meaningful shift. More queer and gender diverse individuals are entering the workforces, bringing with them extremely rich perspectives, abundant talent, creativity, and strength. So they're being more open about their gender identities and sexual orientations. But along with this positive change, also comes a very important responsibilities, right? So workplaces today must not only comply with the POSH Act, but also grow in sensitivity, empathy, and understanding towards employees of all gender identities. For a very long time, the queer experiences have been almost invisible in conversations around workplace safety and harassment. Now, that needs to change. It is changing, and we at Metis are consciously trying to drive that change. So, today's conversation that we're going to be having is all about understanding how our POSH systems can evolve with the changing social and legal landscape. So we are joined by three incredible voices, each bringing in a very unique perspective to this dialogue. So can I have the panel members on video, please? Thank you. So we have Kalki Subramanya, trans empowerment architect, artist, and an author, a pioneering voice for transgender rights and inclusion. She's also the founder of Sahodri Foundation and Voices of All the Survivors via her Red World project. So welcome, Kalki.
Thank you.
We also have Jaina Kothari here today with us. She's a senior counsel, Supreme Court of India, a leading expert on gender justice and constitutional rights, architect of NALSA and Section 377 victories. Welcome, Jaina. Happy to have you here.
Thank you very much.
We also have Sandhya Ramesh, General Manager, Diversity, Equity and Inclusion, Godrej Consumer Products. She's a practitioner, building inclusive workplaces in corporate India. She's a pioneer of factory level pride and allyship programs. Welcome, Sandhya. Happy to have you here.
Thank you. Hi, everyone.
I'm just requesting all of you to keep your audio muted, please. Thank you. We can hear the voices, so please do that. We're going to have this discussion for about 1.5 hours. So we would be taking in maximum about few questions from the audience. What I request is there is a Google Forms which is put up on the chat box. So any questions that you all have, you can put it there. In case you don't have time to kind of take those questions here, we will be getting back to you. We have all your contacts, so we will be getting back to you with all the answers. Yeah. Thank you so much. So let's dive straight in. Kalki, when we talk about my first, I will start with you. So when we talk about safety at work, we often think of all the policies and legal protection. But for queer and trans individuals, safety can mean something much deeper. Safety to express, to belong, to be respected. Now, how do you see this idea of safety evolving in Indian workplaces today?
Hi, Jayaprada, and hello, and thank you to Metis for inviting me for this beautiful panel discussion, and hi to my fellow panelists, Jaina and Sandhya as well. I know them, and so I'm giving them a hi. Hi. So it's a pleasure being here, and I think it's such an important event as well online. As a queer woman and a transgender woman and an activist, I feel that absolutely safety and security for a transgender person or for any queer person working in workplace is very, very important. And it isn't about just workplace, it's of course everywhere. But when we talk about workplaces, I think we need to look at the safety and the security from the very humanistic perspective. Because most of the time, even if an organization offers an opportunity to work in maybe a Fortune 100 or Fortune 500 companies, it is just an opportunity. That place where a trans person, I'm just quoting a trans person because I speak about my lived-in experience and also people like me. When a trans person works, even if the company has a policy, even if the company has a gender neutral toilet, a boardroom, and even if the language that they speak is very inclusive, what is important is people, the co-workers, the teams, the managers, the CEOs, the C-suite people, everybody, even in people in the pantry. Does everyone respect that person, and does everyone see that person beyond their gender identity, beyond their lipstick, beyond their dress code and mannerism and body language? And do they respect still for that? Do they respect that person still for who they are? That is the most important thing. In that aspect, when anybody beyond the policy thing, the most important thing are people working along with that queer person who needs to understand, not just understand, but be an ally, empathize, support, be an ally, be a friend, and then a teammate. And I think that understanding about a queer person, queer issues, LGBTQI, and trans issues, and just taking it not as in a sympathetic way, but more of a friendly, human, empathetic way. That is what actually makes not just a good co-worker or a workplace, but also a very civilized human being. And that's what I would suggest, I would say, and I would emphasize.
Okay. Thank you. Sandhya, from a DEI standpoint, what have you seen in organizations that genuinely create that sense of safety and respect for LGBTQA plus employees? From your perspective, maybe your experience, you can share that.
Yeah, Jaya. And I think I'm just going to build forward on what Kalki was saying, right? I think we've all got to acknowledge, at least, I think the school that I went to and a lot of, my peers and colleagues have gone to, we've not had enough conversations around gender spectrum. You won't believe it. I think every time I begin a sensitization workshop and the question is, do you know the difference between sex and gender? You
Mm.
will see 80% question marks on the face, right? And I think what Kalki was saying, the ability to have these conversations in a very safe space where somebody does not feel ashamed to say, I don't know, but I want to learn, right? Secondly, the ability to have this conversation across workforce categories. You cannot think that, okay, this is only something that is important for my managers or this is only important for my new joiners. I think there needs to be a few years in the organization if
Mhm.
you are and you want to be, where you really need to run this across everybody in the system, whether it's your housekeeping, whether it's your security staff. I mean, all of us have frisking processes, so there could be security processes, there could be housekeeping people, there could be C-suite people. Very, very important for everybody to sit back and have some of these foundational conversations. So I would say the first thing and the most important thing, which is a non negotiable, is creating a safe space where you're really spelling it out. We really go down to the depths, even at a shop floor. And in fact, Kalki was here this time when we celebrated our first Pride March at our Nilgiri, factory. And we did these Nukkad Nataks on the shop floor for everybody, including our contract staff, where we broke it down and we said, what does L mean? What does lesbian mean? So you need to break it down and have those conversations, right? And create safety for those conversations. I would say that is non-negotiable and very important. I think the second one is continue to reiterate the organization stand when it comes to non-discrimination and inclusion, right? So whether it is actually having a pride march where you have, pride marshals joining in, whether it is about ensuring that there is a very specific coverage for the trans community in the policy, talking about the importance in your anti-sexual harassment or anti-discrimination policy, right? I think our ability to maybe sometimes articulate some of these things clearly, ensuring who is your complaints officer or who is a licensing officer for the marginalized communities. I think being able to call all of these things out very clearly and communicating time and again to the organization every single point that this is a non negotiable, this is what we stand for, and this is our culture, right?
Mm.
I'd say that's the second very important piece as an organization. And I think the third one is spending a disproportionate amount of time with managers, especially where teams have individuals from the community, spending a disproportionate time delinking the whole concept of merit and marginalization, right? I think the amount we are able to reduce the fact that somebody is here only because of their identity,
Mm.
I think is the third, piece of coaching that we really do with managers, especially where you have a significant, clearly shared population of the community, and how they can handle these conversations if they hear it, right? So I'd say, Jaya, these are probably three pieces that that I think will beat any policy on whether it is gender reassignment or accommodation. But these three pieces in the workplace become paramount and important.
Sure. Thank you, Sandhya. Very well said. So that takes me to a very important question to Jaina. Since Sandhya spoke about this policy part, Jaina, so I just need your help in making our audience understand. So, do you think our current POSH framework is broad enough to kind of protect all gender identities, or we still have gaps in how the law itself is being interpreted? Because we all know that the POSH Act per se, the aggrieved person has to be a woman under the POSH Act, right? But the gender of the respondent is not specified. The gender of the witnesses are not specified, right? So there is still room for ICs to know how do we handle people from other genders, one. And also, if you could help us, since you were a part of NALSA, how should POSH policies in organizations be updated post this NALSA judgment to basically explicitly protect against gender identity based harassment, especially in the same sex or non binary cases? So, will you be able to throw some light on that as well?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, for inviting me to this conversation. So, yes, so, if we look at the POSH Act covers sexual harassment at the workplace against women, and that was the focus of the law when the law was made. The law was made following the Vishakha guidelines of the Supreme Court, and at that time, sexual harassment of women itself was not articulated. And that's why the guidelines focused only at women. Now, there are two ways in which we can now take this forward. One is that with the recognition of transgender persons, their gender identity, and the legal protections given to them, both under the NALSA judgment of the Supreme Court. I mean, I just want to say a few lines about the NALSA decision because not everybody here may know what the NALSA judgment we're talking about.
Absolutely.
So just to give a two-liner kind of introduction. So in 2014, the Supreme Court gave a judgment, which which was known as NALSA versus Union of India, where the Supreme Court for the first time recognized that transgender persons have the right to self-determine their gender identity, which means that a person can self-decide or self-determine their gender identity as to whether it's male, female, or transgender. Prior to this, there was no such legal recognition articulated in the law or under our constitution. So that really was a turning point. And the court also said that no person should be discriminated on the basis of their gender identity or gender expression, which means that whatever my sex on my birth certificate may be, if I decide my gender identity to be whatever, to be male, female, or transgender, even without any medical treatment or medical reassignment, then that gender identity has to be respected. I should get legal recognition, which means that my name or my gender in the legal documents should be recognized, and I should not be discriminated on that account. And in fact, the court also held that under our constitution, we have the guarantee to equality and non-discrimination on the ground of sex. And the court, in fact, expanded this to mean that this amounts to a guarantee for non-discrimination on account of one's gender identity, and also in other cases on account of sexual orientation. So, those constitutional protections were recognized. What does it mean for the POSH Act? Now, there have been cases where trans women have gone to court, gone to the High Court, and High Courts have recognized sexual harassment against them. And in fact, though they have not covered it under the POSH Act, we have similar provisions for sexual harassment under the criminal law. And the courts have said that they can actually also use those sections under the criminal law, which were also for women. So in effect, one thing is that all POSH policies which are there preventing sexual harassment at work would certainly cover trans women, because trans women, if they identify as women, they should be covered under any law or policy that covers women. Now, what about trans men? What about other non-binary genders? What about same-sex harassment? All of that. Now, the law does not actually cover that specifically the way it is. It only covers harassment of women. And under the ambit of women, women definitely would include trans women. What do we do about other kinds of harassment? What we advise is that, see, the POSH Act covers harassment to women, but nothing stops a company to make its anti-sexual harassment policy much broader, right? It is your company policy. You can definitely make it much broader in your policy. In addition, to ensure that your sexual harassment policy addresses women is a non-negotiable under the law. But you can make it much more broader by saying in the policy, any kind of sexual harassment which is also on the basis of a person's gender identity or sexual orientation would be covered. So that could cover trans men, that could cover other non-binary persons. It could cover same-sex harassment. It could cover harassment by anyone against anyone. So your policy can be much broader. And in fact, in many instances, when companies have come to me to draft a sexual harassment prevention policy, we do try and speak to the company to say, would you like to make it broad enough to ensure that it doesn't cover sexual harassment only faced by women, but faced by anybody, provided it's sexual harassment? There are other grievance or other harassment procedures which are non-sexual harassment based, and many companies are actually very happy. If they have their headquarters somewhere else, maybe in the US or Europe, where anyway they have to cover it, they are more than happy to cover it. And in these ways, you can ensure that your sexual harassment prevention policy can be broad-based and cover everyone.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jenna. So that, I was just, I just wanted to share. So I was having a conversation with one of the employees from a Pride community, and the company does have a gender neutral policy, but when they read, right, they felt that they still didn't feel included. Even a gender neutral policy, reading it, they felt they were not included. Is there any specific term that we need to put it out in the policy document, which makes everyone feel like included? Because even a gender neutral policy, when some people read, they feel it is he, she. But is there anything specific sentence or a word? So you were talking about mentioning about all gender identities, and so is that like a sentence that we need to put out in the policy document to make it all inclusive?
I can just respond quickly. I think, it is important to mention in the policy very clearly that this would cover transgender persons, trans and intersex persons. It would cover same-sex harassment, so that, when you say it, if you make it just gender neutral, yes, the intention is to cover everybody. But you don't know what the intention is unless it is clearly stated. So it is better to state that this covers it covers everyone, but to specify it covers transgender and intersex persons, it covers same-sex harassment, and it covers any sexual harassment which is on the basis of one's gender identity and sexual orientation, so that LGBTQI persons know that these factors are explicitly covered under it.
Perfect. I think that really helps. Even for me as a practitioner, I think that really helped. Jenna, just to continue, can you explain how the POSH Act actually also intersects with the Transgender Persons Act 2019, especially in how ICs can handle complaints from a transgender or a non-binary employee? Just maybe a few lines on that also would help actually.
Yeah, sure. So I'm just unsure whether everyone is familiar with the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act. So there is a new legislation of 2019 and it comes with its rules. So it's called the Transgender Persons Act. And I would, in fact, encourage everyone to go through it. I'm happy to share a link to it, which Jaya, you could maybe share with everyone.
Sure.
So the one thing that, so this is a law that was introduced in 2019 for protection of transgender persons and for protection of their rights. Now, of course, there are problems, there are some aspects of the law that are problematic, but leaving that aside, what the Act, in fact, mandates very clearly is that no transgender persons can be discriminated at the workplace in employment. And one, though it does not mention sexual harassment at the workplace, it does talk about non-discrimination at every level of employment. And it also, in fact, says that all workplaces, which includes private and public, all workplaces shall have a grievance redressal mechanism. And the grievance redressal mechanism mandates that there should be a complaints officer appointed to take up complaints. So, how do you intersect the IC, the POSH Act and this Act? I mean, I would say that you can have a grievance or a complaints officer under the Transgender Persons Act who's also a member of the IC. There's no bar. So that the only difference is under the TG Act, the complaints officer is not mandated to take only complaints of sexual harassment. The complaints officer can take up complaints of any kind of discrimination or harassment from a transgender person. So, but you can have, if you don't want to have multiple persons doing multiple roles, you can have a member of the internal committee who's also the same complaints officer. And in fact, the rules state that there should be an equal opportunity policy to ensure non-discrimination and equal opportunity for transgender persons at every establishment. That it should talk about infrastructural access, it should talk about other forms of non-discrimination, complaints mechanism, and also confidentiality of their gender identity, etc. So, you can integrate this equal opportunity policy with a larger equal opportunity policy that a company may have to ensure that these aspects are also taken into account.
Sure. Thank you. That was extremely useful, Jaina. So, Sandhya, coming back to you, from a corporate implementation point of view, do you actually see companies updating their POSH policy to align with whatever Jaina said in terms of these interpretations, evolving interpretations?
I think, see, gender neutrality also kind of became a buzzword over the years, right? So then I think for most of the global MNCs, the ability to say, hey, we have more gender neutral policies. I think, so I would think in my head, at least for global MNCs and organizations are consciously working, in fact, should definitely have a gender neutral policy. For organizations where there is visible representation, or if it is an organization at least claiming to work in the space of LGBTIQA inclusion, definitely a yes. And I would agree, with what Jana was saying, that try and create more intersections of, having a complaints officer part of the IC, kind of strengthens that confidentiality mechanism. Plus, it's a lot more easier when you're doing a lot more capability building. I think the second thing that restores confidence is when you have representation in your IC. So, representation from non binary communities within your IC, in fact, also builds a lot more confidence for individuals to know that, when they come and they share incidents, there's going to be a sense of justice, and people will also be able to empathize, right? Which is another space. I think while the IC is going to be very dispassionate in a case, right? And the chances are the odds are always, equal when you begin the inquiry in any process.
Sure.
But the ability of having representation also ensures that there is a little bit more empathy and the lens to how a case actually unwinds, kind of, meets at least the spirit of both these laws, right?
Sure.
I think apart from that, awareness, like whenever you're driving awareness, like sometimes you also see very binary representation in your e-modules. You see very binary representation in, the caselets that you talk about. So I
Mhm.
think sometimes also just being able to create more visible representation that is gender neutral. So unless, and because we're in 14 countries and we do have certain countries today where we're not able to be as affirmative on LGBTIQA as we want to be, right?
Mhm.
So you have to segregate that approach as an organization. So today we have actually some countries where we really run binary content, but most countries where we are not forbidden fully from it, we actually run a lot of non-binary content.
Mm.
So I think
Okay.
the organization to be able to also ensure that you're continuously registering that other worlds are possible, other truths are also truths in different ways is a good way for people to also absorb and not only look at a policy and say, oh, I'm protected, but saying, hey, this is a situation, and in a way I connect with the reality of that situation shared.
Sure. Thank you. So, Kalki, you have been interacting with so many people from various organizations and many Fortune 500 companies as well.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you, how aware do you find the employees and HR teams about the rights of transgender and queer employees under these laws? Where do you see the biggest gaps actually?
I think most of the times there is a lot of sympathy
Mhm.
when I've met hundreds of companies, spoken to hundreds of organization heads, and also in meetings and speaking engagements. And I found that people are willing to learn, but the thing is, there are pre-notions. I mean, there are stereotypes, and mostly there is sympathy about queer people, about trans people, and all that. So one of the most important thing for any person who is in the workplace, who is ready to and willing to change, is to unlearn the bias that you have, unlearn whatever you think about queer people, unlearn what is wrong, and willing to unlearn. That is the most important thing, I think so. And most importantly, I think the stereotypes about transgender people is something I've come across again and again and again, not just in small organizations, but in as big multi-billion corporations, heads, and all that as well. So I think that is where, from small to big organization, from Fortune 100 to 500 and other organizations across India and around the world, I've seen that change should happen. And it doesn't happen most of the time. It just is pinkwashing. We would call it as pinkwashing, celebrating pride, and most of the programs related to queer people, their policy, workplace ethics, acceptance is all happening only in the month of June.
Mm.
That isn't actually true diversity, true inclusion. It should be happening 365 days,
Mm.
or at least once in a month or twice in a month, and all that. So breaking all the stereotypes, creating an environment that is safe and secure for a queer person to work, and having a belonging, that I belong to this company, I belong to this organization. And a team leader should earn it. And to earn it, there's a lot of factors that work beyond a policy. It's about understanding people. It's about accepting people as they are, willing to see a person behind their gender identity and sexual orientation, and in the workplace, creating comfortable spaces of dialogue, of allyship, and all that. I think that is lacking in so many companies today. Companies, organizations, corporates are celebrating and doing a lot of programs and sessions only during the month of June. That is a Pride month. So we should be moving beyond tokenism, and willing to create a space for everyone in spite of their gender identity and sexual orientation. And that is very essential. No tokenism, makes a change, a real change.
Sure. Thank you, Kalki. And to just, since you said this so beautifully that it should not be just once in a year celebration, but, this is something that requires a thorough overall, reiteration of, inclusion. I also want to ask, I also wanted to say that, see, when it comes to internal committee members, they often struggle with sensitivity. Like, I have not found a single IC member who doesn't want to do the right thing, right? They
Mm-hmm.
always want to do the right thing, but they don't know like how to do it, like what's appropriate to ask or say. So what is that
Yes.
advice would you give them when handling a complaint from a queer employee? Typically, how should the IC members kind of take it further? What are the right things to do for them?
I think the most important thing for any IC member is to sit with the person, talk to them. And before even sitting with the person, of course, every IC member, every person in the committee should have already been sensitized, already must have an understanding about LGBTQI rights in our country. Not just in the corporates, but everywhere. In 2014, the NALSA, the Supreme Court of India, legally recognized the transgender community as well as the intersex community. And I worked with the Supreme Court judiciary, including the former Chief Justice of India, Altamas Kabir, sir. But nothing has changed so much. Nothing at all has changed so much, even after the Transgender Protection Act 2019. There's a lot of rejection at home, families. There's a lot of public shaming happening. There's a lack of opportunities, rejection, and it continues. And there's slow progress. But yes, there is progress. I would say that for any person in a corporate company, whether it's or in an academic institution, people who are sitting in decisive making positions need to be fully informed, need to have learned it already, and willing to open up for someone who is coming with a complaint or who is a victim or who has something to say from the queer person. The willingness to be open and receive and the willingness to help support is the most important thing. The willingness to listen is the most important thing. And beyond that, I would say that understanding the LGBTQI persons' rights in our country and the company's policy, being human, and also willing to work, willing to listen to the person, of course. But beyond that, sitting together, for example, if there is a sexual harassment complaint from a transgender victim, how does one take it? How does one deal with it? So, of course, there's a lot of methods and codes and all that. I have been consulted by many companies on that. And I've written policies and, of course, have been given my advice on how to do that. In such cases, it is first the victim needs to be prioritized. The victims needs to be prioritized, or the complainant, I wouldn't even call them victim, maybe the complainant needs to be prioritized with full rightful information. And after that, everything has to go step by step, investigation and all that, everything has to go step by step. But the company should have a very strong and stringent policy about discrimination at workplace and make sure that that doesn't repeat, and the person who works there, the queer person working there, feels safe, secure, and has a feeling of, I belong to this company, I'm safe, I'm secure, and I'm willing to give my 100% to it. It has to be like that.
Sure. So I'll definitely maybe circle back with you to maybe get a checklist of certain things that IC members need to be super careful about, etc. Maybe post this session as well.
Yes, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Because I would want to share this with all the companies and, just hope that IC members get a lot of it, a lot from it. So definitely that will be one thing that I will reach back to you. So, Jaina, from a legal perspective, what should internal committee members who are basically, from a gender neutral organization where IC members are taking complaints from everyone, right? So, what should ICs keep in mind to basically ensure both procedural fairness and confidentiality when a person's gender identity is not publicly known? Like Kalki was telling that people do not identify, themselves so openly or publicly, it's not known. So, when it is such a situation, how can ICs keep in mind about this confidentiality and procedural fairness, especially when the gender identity is not known? And what if there is a breach? What do they do?
Yeah. So, they are mandated to maintain full confidentiality. I mean, even the POSH Act says that full confidentiality about the complaints process, about the victim's identity, and all of that has to be maintained. The Transgender Persons Act also mandates confidentiality of a person's gender identity. So, the committee is supposed to maintain that confidentiality. Now, when you get a complaint, from a transgender person, let's assume there is a complaint from a transgender person, and the complaint is that the harassment was due to their gender identity. And this allegation is made in the complaint. Certainly, it's going to come out in the complaints procedure. The procedure of the complaint. It is going to come out, but and against whom that allegation is made, the person who's accused, obviously that will be conveyed to that person, and that person will be asked to give a response. And in the questioning and within the procedure conducted by the IC, certainly this is going to come out. But the mechanism taken by the committee should be that all persons should maintain confidentiality of the complaint and the process so that it is not disclosed outside. There should be strict accountability measures put in place if confidentiality is breached. Most likely, who's going to breach the confidentiality? It is going to be the person who's accused of it, who's accused of the harassment, right? In order to further victimize the victim. We see that. So if either the person who's accused or any of the witnesses are breaching the confidentiality, then the policy has to have some strict measures that are there. The committee members should also ensure that there are some punitive measures taken by people who breach confidentiality. In fact, they can also be, action can be taken against them as well for breaching the confidentiality. So those kind of mechanisms and measures should be there both in the policy, and also the ICC committee members should be able to understand the need for such action to be taken.
Sure. So Sandhya, what are the best practices in terms of IC members being specifically trained on approaching, these kind of cases with empathy and also taking care of the complaints? What are some of the best practices that you have seen based on what Jaina is saying and what Kalki is saying? If you can share some details on that as well.
Yeah. I think when an incident typically gets reported, Jaya, what we do is one, even before it comes to the quorum that gets involved in the inquiry, there is at least one person, and typically it becomes the DNI head, a senior person in DNI, etc., who may also have privy to the gender identity of the person who joins in some of these cases.
Okay.
Has a conversation with the person to at least help them understand, because if this is a person who's not out and proud and entirely where the identity is not disclosed, it's also important for them to understand that it could be a process where there would be three other people where an identity would have not been known, which will come to light, right? And I think first the person really assesses, is there any way in which we can protect the dignity of that individual or the safety of the individual. So that's typically for us, step number one, right? I think the other part is also give them the option of, if that they have faced at any point in time a feeling or a sense that any of the existing members who are part of the quorum would have a bias or could have a previous experience with the individual where it left the individual feeling like there was bias, right? They have all the right to be able to request for. So I think also educating colleagues on some of these rights, especially, when they're not from, say, the larger, more representative communities. That's the second step that is taken as part of the conversation. I think the third piece is when we meet as a quorum, like when we look at the initial meeting and just kind of review the complaint together before we set up the first inquiry with the complainant. We just spend some time on, the fact that while we're all sensitized, while we may be aware, are we really aware? Are there questions that are in our mind? As a committee, we come together and say, okay, are there some things that we think should not be asked, but hey, this is in my mind right now, and if I get it, how can I voice it? Who from maybe the committee can start with leading an inquiry process? If there is something that you're not sure is going to land well as a question, right? What could be a pre-context that maybe a member can set? So I think just, us having a psychologically safe conversation among the core IC team, one, to ensure we're all on the same page and understanding about our awareness, right? And then the second thing is, if there are two or three things that are striking us right now that in fact form a very critical part of the inquiry, but we also know that it could be a trigger in some way, how do we ensure that it's able to land sensitively? So I think these are a couple of practices here that have, helped us actually work with, these situations, and the incidents get reported from the committee in a more sensitive manner.
Sure. Thank you. So Jaina, just a hypothetical question. So I mean, how can we, or how could organizations, what are some of the legal or policy level innovations could organizations adopt to future proof their POSH systems for all genders and identities? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think it's very important that organizations are looking at some of these legal developments so that they keep updating their policies and their procedures in-house. So one of the things is that, so we've had all these recent legal developments on transgender rights. So the NALSA judgment, I mentioned how a few high courts have in fact looked at sexual harassment, criminal provisions applicable to trans persons. We have a very recent decision as of last month by the Supreme Court in the case of Jane Kaushik versus Union of India. In fact, this was a case where a trans woman had on two occasions been, denied employment in by private establishments. And then she finally went to court, and the court, in fact, noted that in barely any private establishments, the complaints officer was even appointed as required under the law. So, and in fact, even the equal opportunity policy is not being maintained. I mean, we can look in our own group today. We have so many people, you have so many people who are joining this webinar, right? You can just do, not to name and shame, but just to get a poll. How many people who are here from so many different organizations have a complaints officer under their Transgender Persons Act, or have an equal opportunity policy for trans persons for non-discrimination there already in place, And what we, I guess a large number would not have, because most people are not aware of it. So the first step would be, if we want to future-proof it, first we have to keep abreast with the law, with the legal developments, and because see, I know we have, most companies have legal compliance officers, who will do, all legal compliance. But the thing is that transgender issues and transgender rights are so they're barely seen legally as an important issue. So it would not even come under the radar for legal compliance, So that is first a start. To ensure that we are up to date with the legal developments. Secondly, how do we ensure that the company's internal policies are, you have the policies that are required under the law, or you tweak your existing policies to broaden it, where, for example, the POSH Act, you need to have an equal opportunity policy for trans persons. Do you have that? Second, you need to have a complaints officer. Do you have that? Thirdly, can you broaden your existing sexual harassment prevention policy? So then you can actually broaden it and reframe it to cover everyone. And finally, it's okay, you may have ticked all the boxes for actually doing all of this on paper. How do you actually make sure that people are in tune or in line with this? So your ICC committee members need to have training. I mean, everyone needs to have trainings, right? Your staff, your senior staff, your junior staff. I mean, how are you going to really ensure that this is seeping through every level of the organization? I mean, that is an ongoing process. It's never, you can't just do it at one go, but you have to keep doing it. But you have to make the start to ensure that both policies on paper and in training and in practice, they are actually put in place.
Sure. I mean, beautifully said. Completely agree. So Kalki, just as a continuation to what Jaina said, she was stressing, and all of you were equally stressing on the need to train, right? Now, mostly what I have also seen and experienced is that training for the IC members does not involve a person who is actually, I mean, especially when we are talking about the IC members being trained to understand the nuances of a queer employee, right? Unless you have lived through it, you have experienced it, anyone who gives a training will not be actually doing justice to it. So do you think the training programs for the IC should involve a person from the queer community to come and actually talk and tell them what they need and what they need to be understood, etc.? Because most of the trainings are done by non-queer people now, even as on today.
I think that is the most absolutely important thing. I mean, when a person talks about their own experience, for example, if I talk about my lived experience as a trans woman and how I have broken the struggles, what kind of struggles I faced, how I broke my struggles and established myself in a society that discriminates, in a country that is still struggling to accept that story, that experience, that is very authentic and very valuable, because it is not coming from a second person or a third person. It is a first person's account. And that is why when we talk about inclusion, when we talk about diversity, inclusion of LGBTQI people, it's essential that storytelling is done by not just others, men or women, but trans people, about trans persons. And about LGBTQI and queer persons, it should be, the perspective should come from them, because that is valid, that is authentic, that is real, and that doesn't have any other, third person narrative. Because at most times I've seen that when a story, a true story, or a life story is told by a trans person, it actually comes out with a lot of emotions. It comes out sometimes very poetically, artistically, very beyond that poetic, artistic thing. It is real. Whereas I've seen that when a heterosexual person actually tells a story of a trans person, whether they succeeded or how their life was marred at workplace and all that, it is just a narrative. So even for policy writing or any other work, when it comes to POSH, I think creating policies or talking about in the meetings and creating an ICC committee for all of that, LGBTQI people being there is absolutely important.
Great. Yeah.
Because
I think
it gives more value, it gives more authenticity, and it gives full push for real experience and opinions to be shared by that person for our entire community.
right. Yeah, like when we give training about an aggrieved woman being harassed, we are able to add a lot of essence to it, because as women we know what we go through, so it's very easy. So I perfectly agree when you say that when you want IC members to also understand what queers go through. I think people from that community have to also be involved in the training. I think a great point. Sandhya, I mean, since yours is an organization which has been doing some path-breaking work on inclusion and diversity, right? I mean, are there practices where you involve people from the community of, I mean, Pride community to actually do the training? Or have you seen any other companies doing that? If there is anything that you can share?
Yeah. And I think we're still in our journey of doing path-breaking work, so not entirely there when it comes to inclusion. Yes, we do. In fact, we do have, representation from the community, especially when we build any kind of content, right?
Hmm.
And that's where I was telling that it was a blind spot to us,
Hmm.
and we recreated all our content as soon as we got views from individuals from the queer community saying, all of this is great, I know you want to protect us, but we're not seen anywhere. And when that input came in, we actually recreated all our content, and I think that's when we took this whole approach of non-binary binary. So I would really echo what Kalki said. I think representation is very important. It adds a whole lens that you didn't have earlier, right? So that's very important. Having said that, we do, I think, as an organization, I'll talk about where we are. I don't think we are in a space where we have very, very high representation. So what it also makes it challenging to do is to have it consistently across all ICs, at that level of training. I think that's where I've seen that our ability to make it consistent means that you've got to have a lot of adequate representation. And for us, that's still a journey. A lot of our trans representation still kind of cuts across the executive levels. We have trans folks in our office, we have trans folks, but I would say trans folks in leadership, like really being able to be there and be fully part of the IC is again a journey for us, and we're not there as yet. But that would be definitely the ideal state for organizations.
Sure. Thank you. So now my request from Kalki and Sandhya is also to share. Maybe we can start with Kalki and then go to Sandhya. Despite companies have put in a lot of effort in putting their policies in place, and we do have employees from LGBTQA plus community who still hesitate to report harassment. In fact, we've taken a lot of time for women themselves to come and actually start reporting. But we see the harassment from LGBTQA plus community complaints coming in from them as abysmally low, at least to the internal committees, right? So what is, in your opinion, what is the biggest reason for this silence from LGBTQ? What is it that is stopping them from coming up and sharing? And how can HRs and ICs actually help to, kind of bring in that trust, saying that, hey, we are there. So what are a couple of reasons why it's not coming out?
That question actually reminds me of our Red Wall project from Sahodari Foundation. In the Red Wall project, it's an initiative through our foundation where transgender survivors of sexual abuse and violence express their lived experience using art, poetry, storytelling instead of formal the way of doing it. I think it actually reclaims their voices. This project actually confronts stigma and it sparks dialogue in society through art, poetry, storytelling, and all that. So I think trans people and LGBTQI people are constantly and every day used to being experiencing harassment. And in the entire LGBTQI spectrum, I wanted to state that, and for 100% sure, that transgender people are the most sexually abused person as well everywhere in the world. Every transgender person has at least been abused at least one time, sexually abused in their life. So most of the times, since it's multiply repeated for a LGBTQI person, for a queer person, it is multi times repeated at various of their lifespans. So most of the times they have experienced injustice. They have experienced nobody coming to support them. They have experienced only silence with them and with the person they have complained also. Or or just turning it around on themselves. So these experiences have actually created a character in us that it is let's it's a part of our life, sadly that is the sum of what we feel as every trans women, even from the slums of Ernaur. I have so many friends there. They even joke about the sexual harassment that they have gone through and think that it's a part of being a trans woman. Such is the erosion that have they faced that they've summed up that we are never going to get justice. And this is something that needs to be changed. And that needs to be changed completely because every human life is valuable, whether it's a trans person born in a slum or born in a palace or whoever it is. In that case, I think the most important thing for any person who goes through a sexual harassment, to make them, I think for them to make that person understand that there is support available in the organization, in the committee. The committee members are all willing to help and support. That feeling, that sort of, okay, I can open up, that willingness, when it is created to a victim, only then that, unless that is created in an organization, they'll not come. Because the tokenism in an organization is one of the reasons they may not be opening at all. If LGBTQI diversity inclusion programs are conducted every year, not only in June, but throughout consistently, to make sure that nobody is discriminated, not men and women, but also trans people and LGBTQI persons. Nobody is discriminated. Everybody is equal here. This company is all about talent, about smart work, hard work, and it's not about gender identity. It's not about their gender expression. It's not about somebody's sexual orientation. We are not bothered about who's living with whom. That's not happening here. This is a place for everyone to be belonged here. And that is the most important thing in any other company. And that to get a trans person to that place, and when they go through a discrimination, they just effortlessly come and open up to the committee. That, if you have that, that is the best practice, I would say. That is the company that has the best policies, best practices, and that is how it should be. So tokenism, as I say again and again, should be removed from any organization. LGBTQI sensitization should be consistent. Sensitivity towards the policies of organizations should be held very often. And of course, you don't have to have dry sessions. You can have so many sessions. Of course, even though in our Red Wall project, it's a very, very, very sensitive matter when we talk about their sexual, abuse that they have gone through. Because I have also gone through, of course. So I know as a fellow trans woman how to talk to them. And at times I cry with them because I empathize with them as well. So creating story circles, sharing experiences, having spoken word, poetry word session. This is where art and poetry and theater all have a role to play. It is not just for entertainment. It's also about opening up. It's about learning for us, unlearning for us, and also an opportunity for everyone to authentically express themselves without fear, without doubt. And uh, that reduces isolation, that bridges to counseling, that creates safe space meetings, and that is also a training for peers. And that is the kind of support that a victim or a person who is from the LGBT community who comes for support needs. And organizations need to adapt to that level. And that level actually takes commitment, consistency, and a lot of small steps, but creates a big value for any organization.
Sure. I just loved, what you're doing in terms of using art poetry, storytelling, and theater to basically, send strong messages and also a sense of safety where people are able to express. Thank you so much, Kalki, for sharing that. That is really, really good.
You're welcome.
Sandhya, you have at Godrej, you have run the pride quizzes in factories, and other things that you have done at the factory level, right? So, how can these POSH sessions? What are the tools that your POSH sessions can use basically to train a non-LGBTQA staff to recognize and report microaggressions even before they escalate?
Yeah. I think what we've been striving over the last, year a little bit more is, I think sometimes we take a very compliance lens, and then inclusion becomes this thing that is hanging in the air. It's like a feeling, right?
True.
And it's a very esoteric kind of a concept, right? But how does it show up in day-to-day behaviors? How does it show up in, when I'm interacting or giving feedback? So we've started actually creating something called, respect at Godrej. We started creating a shared narrative on what is respect at Godrej, right? And there, foundationally, we've looked at the three levels, which is actually this whole piece on anti-discrimination, anti-harassment, bullying, and then there is inclusion, right? So I think even for employees to understand it, they start seeing all of these as very interrelated and interconnected areas of respect, which is our value.
Mhm,
And in the last year, we've been doing what we call dilemma based debates
mhm,
with teams. So we basically have started creating some variations. Needless to say, our incidents that get reported, whether sexual or whether these are microaggressions, actually have a certain character. So we started creating a few variations of these incidents, and every quarter we update them depending on which are the different types of themes of incidents that are coming up, right? Like, for example, sometimes on the gender front, we see that very unknowingly, slightly more tenured elder male team members end up inviting, say some of our young trainees who have moved newly to their location, inviting them home for a meal. That
mhm,
gets misconstrued in the minds because one, there's this whole generational gap,
mhm,
and two, some person thinks that, oh, that's an extension of my Indian hospitality mindset. But the other person says, hey, I have boundaries, right? So I think what we've really been trying to do is create a shared narrative of what does respect at Godrej mean and
mhm,
how some of these situations can play out. And I think these are debates where we've seen a whole contrarian set of responses, right? So we give a situation and we say, you are in this situation, what would you do? And there are different responses coming, and then we eventually synthesize and arrive at, okay, what would have been the right thing to do in this and why? I feel these kind of debates of being able to surface a hypothetical situation time and again, I think is slowly creating a better understanding of what can be done, what can't be done, right? Like, how deeply will you want to connect or explore or understand a trans person's journey? I mean, that's something that's deeply personal. But you could always approach it from a space that, hey, I wanted to know, I'm curious. But there are again boundaries where there is a lens between being warm and open and then intrusive, right?
mhm,
So I think that's where a lot of the incidents that come in actually get reported for us. It's mostly on that, on that balance between how can I be stay open-minded and curious, but not be intrusive, right? And I think kind of same paging this, doing these conversations have really impacted. Like I said, the other one is using different formats,
mhm,
which may not necessarily be only these conversations. We have a whole set of videos. We have the respect channel that runs throughout the year. And the
mhm,
idea is to intersect it. So I'm not going to do only something specifically for women, or I won't do something specifically for persons with disabilities or for the trans or the queer community unless I need to take a forward approach for any one of these communities, right? So how are we normalizing it, just saying that this is our ecosystem? And this is what respect means for all of us. So I think these are ways in which we as an organization have started, taking steps towards creating a worldview that mirrors the larger society.
Sure. Superb. Also, Sandhya, do you track, I mean, what KPI should ICs track to know if POSH is like truly inclusive? Are there anything, I mean, I don't know, I'm just asking, it's a vague question, but just trying to understand, do you track any KPIs for, just for POSH? Today's session, we are just restricting it to POSH. So just to know if POSH is truly inclusive, do you track any data? Do you track
Um,
any? Yeah.
I think definitely you will want to look at trends, right? You will look at trends of representation in different pockets, and you'll also look at trends of incidents reported. The good part is we have started a mechanism of tracking both formal incidents and informal, because we've noticed that we've not been always very successful and in having the informal complaints come in to formal, right? The
Mhm.
second thing is we have something called like a cubicle corner of a platform that we use. And that particular space is actually a safe space where anyone can come and actually have a conversation that helps them explore on whether it was sexual harassment or not. Because sometimes there's also this dilemma in your head
Mm,
that you experience something saying, oh, is this actually sexual harassment or not, right?
mm, mm.
And the ability to clarify it at the other end. So it's an anonymous chat room where there is a conversation from the other end where certain questions lead, and then there's eventually a very clear next steps given on saying what can actually help you bridge this. So if it's a formal complaint that can be taken through the IC route, the IC details, the process details, right? So there's clarity around all of that. I feel these are a couple of steps. I mean, then these are the two numbers that we track. So one is the formal incidents, the other one is the informal incidents that are coming in but not getting converted to formal incidents. And then the third one is, the queries and questions that are coming on Cubicle that are not getting converted either to formal complaints or not coming back to the IC fully. So
Okay,
these are metrics that we look at.
sure. Jaina, like, another question that I have specifically for IC members, like, we do have certain processes defined under the POSH Act, which the ICs know how to follow. But is there anything specific privacy protections under the Transgender Persons Act, which your IC members should be aware of while inquiring, especially during evidence or hearings to avoid re-traumatization, etc.?
Yeah, I'll address that. Could I also just pick up on a couple of on one or two other questions that you had raised, even to
Sure.
Sandhya and Kalki, on how do
Sure.
we make the IC more representative?
Sure, please.
And this can also tie in with your question on privacy. So
Sure.
one is to make the IC more representative. I think both of them had said that often there aren't that many members from the trans community in an organization. So then how do you ensure that the committee is more representative? One of the ways in which we can do that is also by getting the external member who
Mhm.
is a trans person. So that we have to be more open about. Normally, the external member under the POSH Act is a woman, but you can definitely get external members from trans community and trans activists who can be there. That will also signal to your employees that this is a committee that takes issues seriously. So that is something I wanted to actually raise.
Sure. So, Jaina,
Yeah.
before you go, so what you're saying is, in spite of having one external member as per the POSH Act, you can additionally choose to have, I mean, if you have
No, I'm saying that that external member under
member
the POSH
itself.
Act can be a trans person.
Okay, got that.
That's what I'm saying. So you are complying with the POSH Act, but
Mhm.
you're also signaling and getting a member from the trans community on your IC to therefore signal that yes, we take even complaints against and the external member can also take up and be part of the ICC for the women's complaints. There is no bar, right? So the committee is the same. Your external member, you needn't only look at women. You can look at trans persons to be part of the ICC is one suggestion to make sure it's more representative.
So just a follow-up question on that itself, Jenna. So let's say you have a normal committee with an external member, and there is a specific complaint coming in from a queer employee. Only for that case can we have somebody from outside to be a part of the committee to just help the internal committee. Is that also a possibility?
See, you can also have that. There is no bar under the POSH Act as to getting an additional person on it. But what you can also do that, and that's an option. But I'm also suggesting that instead of looking at getting an external person who's queer only for queer complainants, instead of that, there is no bar to, and there is, I don't think if that external person who's a trans woman maybe, why, and who has taken up these complaints or who has sat on, who has the experience of sitting on these complaints committees before, that person can be part of the committee even for other complaints. We don't have to necessarily segregate, because by segregating, you're saying for women, only women should be there. For queer people, only queer people should be there. I mean, it's not necessary, but you can have a trans person who can also look at complaints of sexual harassment that women may face, because you're also going to have other members. I mean, this is just one suggestion. You can also do it in a case by case basis if you like, something better than nothing, you know.
Sure.
So you can do it in any way which is conducive to the company. On your question of privacy, I think many members of internal complaints committees would know that even in cases of, evidence taking, where complaints are filed by women for sexual harassment, there are measures to protect privacy and to ensure that there's no additional harassment by trying to say that you don't do a cross-examination, but you ask the questions in writing.
Right.
I'm sure in your trainings with the internal committee, you would have done that. In a lot of times, instead of like a face-to-face cross-examination, which can be quite traumatizing and quite difficult, we often ask committees that let the other person give a list of questions that they want to ask, and the victim can actually give the answer in writing. So many of these measures would be the same even for trans persons when complaints are filed, to ensure that this is not a process for re-traumatizing the person. If the person doesn't want to be questioned or doesn't want the questioning by the committee with the accused, you can definitely ask that I don't want to see the accused. You can fix the dates for the inquiry on different dates, so that you're not faced by the accused. And of course, all other confidentiality requirements to maintain the privacy of the identity of the complainant, all of that should be there. The documentation should be in sealed covers. Other people should not have access to it. All of that should be maintained. So I think it's the same. And we need to ensure that we do it in cases of complaints by trans persons as well.
Okay. And also, if you can talk a little bit about Section 377, and also how do POSH frameworks treat retaliation against queer complainants as aggravated harassment? If you can share any precedent also to support this, it'll be great.
Okay, I don't have precedents, but I mean 377, just to for the larger group, Section 377 was a provision under our Indian Penal Code which criminalized same-sex conduct, and that was being used really against the LGBTQI community as a form of criminalization. We had in 2018, a landmark Supreme Court decision where the Supreme Court decriminalized that section and said that persons who are adults and who are voluntarily engaged in same-sex conduct cannot be criminalized. We don't have that section in the new BNS.
Okay.
So that was the starting point for recognition of the rights of all persons based on their sexual orientation. Now that has opened up the social space for gay persons to be open about their sexual orientation and their identity. Of course, decriminalization is one thing. How accepting our workplaces are, how accepting, there was another question raised earlier that, you were asking that how do we, people should be themselves. Yes, of course, people should be themselves, but are our spaces open enough? And, when you talk about retaliation, when you said, what about retaliation? And I think, Sandhya, you also mentioned when people are curious, how do you maintain curiosity but not cross boundaries? I find that often in our workplaces, in our educational spaces, in social spaces, often this is used to know more about the person's sexual practices. Everything is about because sexual orientation and gender identity is such stereotypes about queer sexual identity. So everything, I mean, people will push more to know about your sexual practices, and then there's no privacy maintained. It is disseminated without consent. I mean, we see that happening with women as well, right? You see a single woman at work, and everybody's curious to know what your personal life is, right? Or if you're a divorced woman or you're a separated woman, everybody is curious to know, and then there are rumors being spread and all of that, right? We see that in every profession and in every workplace. So how do you retaliation, further victimization, all of that is very, very serious. And unless these there are, I mean, workspaces have to show that they really mean, and how do they inculcate acceptance? Only then will actually people come forward and file complaints. First of all, the reason people are also not filing complaints is you're too scared to come forward, because you feel if you file a complaint, then your identity will be known, it will be used against you, and we have seen that happen. So how do you give that confidence that you can come forward and then take steps to ensure that further victimization and retaliation is not taking place, or if it does take place, then take really strong measures against people who are doing the acts of re-victimization.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jana. That is really useful. Kalki, so I mean, we have spoken about Sahodari model, which also is like very encouraging. How do you think peer support circles within organization? It's also an outflow of what Jaina was trying to say. Like how can peer support circles be embedded into POSH redressal to basically take care of the mental health, retention of employees, etc.? Any thoughts on that? Kalki, are you there?
Yeah, yes. I just unmuted my audio.
Okay, sure.
Okay. I think when we talk about peer support circles, into embedding that into POSH, I'd say that alongside the internal compliance committee, setting up peer circles where survivors can share their experiences safely is absolutely important. Allowing survivors to bring a trained peer supporter with them during complaint hearings or meetings is also should be open to, like an organization, a committee should be open to that as well. The circle members should be equipped with skills like listening, confidentiality, and most importantly, trauma sensitive care. It's so important, all of this is. That is listening, confidentiality, and trauma sensitive care. And it should have a regular safe spaces, because holding peer circle meetings can, even outside of complaints, is essential because it builds trust and prevents isolation. And as I spoke before, it is a bridge to counseling. Peers can actually guide survivors towards professional mental health services whenever needed. At times, a complainant or a victim may have severe mental trauma, and they will definitely at most times need a health practitioner's intervention. So I think peer circles can assure survivors that they are not alone by lowering their stress and stigma around reporting, and also guiding them to mental health services. The retention boost is so important as well, because employees who feel supported are more likely to stay instead of leaving after harassment. And I think that is very essential for any organization's corporate companies' growth, employee retention. So this actually gives employee retention boost. Employees who actually feel supported are more likely to stay, of course, in the organization. And policy recognition is another one. POSH rules can explicitly, or in policies, POSH rules should be explicitly mention that peer support as a part of their redressal, giving it legitimacy. Very, very important that. And that is the most important part for any LGBTQI person, I think, having experienced that. Beyond that, moving workplaces from just complaints to care and compassion should be the mantra. To sum up, especially valuable for trans and gender diverse employees who often distrust formal systems, because the formal systems will not possibly work for LGBTQI employees, particularly transgender people. So these spaces should be more, the workplaces should be more than just compliance places. It should be a place of care and compassion as well through these POSH peer circle groups.
Sure. So before we wind up and thank our panelists, we have a very exciting news for you, because all the panel members have been so vociferous in saying that we cannot have just like, like as Kalki used the word pink wash, right? So our awareness sessions on POSH should not be just a one-time thing, but also should be happening throughout the year. So as Metis, we have also done something on this front. So I would like to share this. I would like Rajesh Attihalli, my partner at business, to also take it over and share that with all of you. And then I'll come back and I'll be thanking the panelists.